and welcome to Fascism on Film. I am James Kent. Along with me is Teal Minton, and you can find us on fascismonfilm.com and on Apple Podcasts and other podcast places. This week, we are talking about, I think, a very important movie. It certainly is an important film in post-war German film. It was a film that was sort of kind of kicked off their new wave, if you will, because after World War II, the film industry in Germany was decimated like most of the country, split in half. Half the country was taken by Russia, came East Germany, and then there's the West. But then a new crop of young filmmakers who had come out of World War II and now were interested in telling some stories that couldn't have been told before. And take a look from a German perspective of World War II and what happened to the German people under the Nazis. And there is a filmmaker named Bernhard Wicki, and he, through the strength of this movie we're going to talk about, 1959's The Bridge, and it was nominated for that year's Oscar for International Film. The film is a pretty brutal look at supposedly, I guess, a true incident. Teal's going to talk about that in a second. It's based on a book, and it involves the final days of...
Yeah, it's really the last week of the war, and I think the war ends 4 days after the end of the film. So it really is the final, and it's similar to what we saw in a film like Jojo Rabbit, where it's the last days of the war. The Americans and the Russians are closing in, moving into Germany, and things are sort of at the beginning of this film. It's a very interesting setup in this town, and we have this group of I think they're about 16, these schoolboys, and they're really the only men in the town. There's very few there's a few old men, but it's basically them and a bunch of women, and the town is kind of functioning and going along through its day, and these kids are you see them, their nationalism, their teacher is kind of teaching them to be nationalistic, and they are completely caught up in this world, and they probably, I don't know if they'd been in Hitler Youth or not, but they definitely...
No, they would have been in Hitler Youth. It was required. Yeah. I mean, they're full-fledged young Nazis. They just are not old enough to be called up to service.
Yeah, and they're almost, the thing is sort of the totality of it is that they don't have, there was never a point at which they weren't Nazis. Their whole life they've been Nazis. Their whole life this has been, they're 16, this is 1944, they've grown up with this. There isn't an alternative to them. They just see this as being the way the world works, and they are fanatical about it. And they want to fight. They want to be part of the cause. They want the potential to die for the cause and kill for the cause. They're excited and enthusiastic about it.
In many ways, it's masterful because you have a look that I haven't seen really in any other films on this subject, that it's a tragedy. And you get that, which Teal you said, is that it does take place. If you see April of 1945, it's the end. So just a correction, I think you had said, Teal, that it starts out in April of 44. It's April 45. That was the end. Yeah. So when you get that information at the beginning of the movie, really that the events are going to be tragic because whatever is going to unfold, it happens in the final days or weeks, and that Hitler is soon going to kill himself. And, this group of kids, you get a sense, this is a very economical movie in that it's less than 2 hours, and yet it's focused on 7 boys. And obviously, because they're German, it's a little hard to get too much of which character is which a little bit, because there's 7 and you only can have so many minutes per kid, but it does a great job of introducing these kids, and they're all facets, but there isn't necessarily the one kid you're going to sympathize with, because every one of them in their own way is in it for the cause. And it's fascinating because they've been misled. And I think that the school teacher, you said, like, he's teaching them fascism. He's clearly somebody who's doing what he has to do under duress.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, his heart is not entirely in it, and when they do get their draft notices, he's really ambivalent about it. He doesn't really want to see them go off to war, but they're really excited about getting their draft notices.
Well, he goes and tries to talk to the people in charge. This is what's so fascinating in this movie. All of the adults that you see, in one way or in the other, they're wearing two hats. They're wearing the Nazi hat for fear a lot of times.
Yes.
And then they're also wearing the hat where they know it's a lost cause and that they're caught between the ideal that you are supposed to die for death. And there's a lot of talk actually in this movie about that part of fascism where you are supposed to give yourself for every last inch of the motherland.
There's a really specific thing they say, which is that if you're defending 1 square foot of land, you're defending the whole country. And it really is about that fight to the last man kind of thing. And there's a lot of talk about like using a bayonet and killing people in a really personal way. And so it really does show how fascism glorifies this idea of dying for the state or the collective or the nation, really.
Yeah, and until these kids are in it, they really do want to almost like they don't think they themselves are going to die, right? But they were willing to die for the cause.
Yes.
They want that glorious defeat the enemy, and they are under the guise that somehow that Germany is going to be triumphant because that's what the propaganda has fed them. There was never, unless you started hearing things from people you trusted, the word was that Germany was winning the war.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they buy into that completely. And there is no point at which somebody breaks through that idea that they've built up through propaganda. There's one point where there's an older soldier who's kind of like, we're losing. But that guy gets taken away quickly and ignored. And so there isn't anything that breaks through their conception of so total their perception of what the war is and the fact that they're winning. Nothing breaks through it. And they just keep moving forward into this getting drafted, becoming soldiers. And they're really only soldiers for a day before the front really comes to them. They're not sent to the front. The front really comes to them. And the teacher does go and talk to them and talk to the commanding Nazi and tries to get him to go easy on these kids. And they do end up finding an assignment for these kids that should technically keep them out of combat because they've only been soldiers for a day. But then we see the machinery of start to break down around them. We see deserters, we see friendly fire, things like that, and the machinery starts to sort of collapse around them, but they refuse to let it go. They're still there fighting the fight, even as other people are abandoning it.
I can't remember every kid's name. There are some interesting things in their home lives. We get little snippets.
Very.
So one kid, he clearly has sort of a wealthy background, and his father. Again, this is a movie that's not going to explain everything to you, so you have to kind of read between the lines. But it seems like his father was a big deal in the SS and had been some kind of commander who's maybe dead now, and that his mom, and they're wealthy, they have a lot of the trappings. But there's a really interesting moment because again, we're dealing with like the final days, and this is obviously almost like a 48-hour period where a lot of stuff's going on, that there's a mention, all of the house servants have left. And somebody has to inform the mother that they've like taken off, and that the person's like, well, we need to report that. And what you realize, and I like that this movie doesn't get heavy-handed and explain it to you, this person whose father was like some kind of bigwig in the SS, those were more than likely Jews that had been sent there to work as servants.
Oh, I didn't put that together.
Yes, I know. Well, this is my second time. This was your first time watching it.
Yeah.
So certain details jumped out is because the movie doesn't go in and get too focused on it, but I'm like, who are these people that they took off their opportunity to leave? They were like, this is our chance to
Yeah.
get out. And whether or not they were Jews or whether they were like Russians or whoever they were, these were not people that were like, paid servants. These were people that had been brought
They were
into.
forced labor. Yeah.
Yeah. This movie does a lot of interesting stuff like this. Another guy who has a father whose mom must be dead or left or something. They have somebody who's working for them, and the son has a crush on her, and then he discovers that the father's having an affair with her. And it's like she's maybe grabbing onto somebody because who knows what her situation is. And again, you're getting all these snippets in just a few minutes of screen time.
Yeah, and I think what's really remarkable about this first part of the film is that all of these things are incredibly ordinary. It all seems like people are just going about, oh, the workers ran off. Well, that's something to deal with. And they're sort of going about their day-to-day life. And there isn't, there is an air raid siren at one point, but it doesn't have that tension necessarily. The tension is there because we know what's going to come, but they're going about it as though it's their normal everyday life. And it's calm, it's peaceful around the town. And there is that constant threat there, the threat of the war, but it feels very ordinary.
There's always been this talk, the history of the end days was that they were recruiting old people and kids to fight, right? You hear that all the time, and you're kind of like, well, what did that really mean? But in this movie, and which is great because it's told by German filmmakers, that you can see that the army that's being kind of recruited up are these, 16-year-old boys and old men that you would never see fighting. And the picture that paints, and you can especially see those in charge that are left, that you can see that these are guys that are like, they know it's that bad, that if this is who is being now drafted in, you don't have to have propaganda telling us we're winning the war. They know that this is over. Yeah. And they see the soldiers that have come back and they know it's done, and that there's tragedy at every turn in this movie to see that a country would put its people and continue them on. And, it's not Nazi Germany, but the similar thing happened in Japan, right? Yeah. All in service of the imperialism, that they were willing to fight to the very last Japanese. And and instead they saw that there was going to be total destruction, and they eventually capitulated. But they were willing to sacrifice every man, woman, and child, and that was what was sort of happening in Germany. And so I'm finding that fascinating.
I think the draft age was from at that point in the war. The draft age was anyone between the ages of 16 and 60.
Yeah. And it was probably 18 before, and, and of course they didn't have any men left. They had lost a lot of men, and of course a lot of them were prisoners too. I mean, they lost them from death and also prisoners, and it really was a small country, so there's only so many people. But what is also very fascinating is what you were saying. These kids get their draft notice. They're very excited, and in various different ways. And again, I'm looking for the one character that really doesn't want to be a part of this. And so far, you don't have that. They may have very different degrees of what they think is heroism.
Yeah, some of them are more scared of what's going on than others. Some of them are more caught up in the violence in a way, and some of them are sort of cowards. But they're all devoted in one way or another to the cause, to the war, to winning the war, to fighting, to the whole, to being soldiers. They're all devoted to it.
But they go there their first night, right? And one kid even shows up early. He's all excited and he wants to get going. And the guy's like, well, no, dude, go. It's too early. You go to sleep. But these kids go and get their bunks. They're sleeping and they're woken up, right? So they think they're starting their training.
Yeah.
And instead, no, they're like calling all the people up. They actually have to send everybody to the front. Now, these kids have zero training other than what they've been trained for during all their Hitler youth.
Exactly.
Right? That's why they know how to clean the guns and do that to a degree. They've done all that type of drills, but they have not actually received any full training. And that's when, it's deemed, some people in the town are trying to save them. There's a bridge that's meaningless other than to blow it up at a certain point so that the enemies are going to not be able to get through the town or whatever. Or I think they want the tanks to go over the bridge, then blow it up so that
then blow it up.
The tanks are then immobilized away from the troops. So they just put these kids there to kind of ride out the night until it's destroyed to hopefully save them. Because I think that the people in charge know this is going to be over any day.
Oh, they definitely know there's no winning going on here. And in fact, we see a Nazi officer sort of abandoning his post and leaving.
There's a guy assigned to them. And
that's not the guy I'm talking about, the guy on the motorcycle.
Oh, okay. Because yeah. I thought you were talking about their guy, because this is where the tragedy comes in, is that the guy who's in charge of them, he feels bad for these kids, and he's like, oh, I'm just going to go downtown and get you some chocolate, right? I'll get you guys hot chocolate. I'll be right back. And he's the one, he's just trying to keep them safe, and he knows that the bridge is going to get blown up. Well, he goes into town, and immediately a couple of clowns that are in town think that he's trying to desert.
Yes.
And they're giving a hard time, and he's like, no, I'm not, I'm going back. But they don't understand why anybody would be watching that bridge, because nobody told them that these kids were assigned, because they know that it's going to get blown up.
So there's no point in guarding it.
Yeah, breakdown in communication. Long story short, this poor guy who's supposed to watch the kids get shot and killed. And so suddenly these kids don't have anybody commanding them, have no idea that the bridge is going to be blown up anyway. And so they think they've got to save this bridge with every inch of their life.
Yes, absolutely. And they are, and that's where the film turns, right? Is that the battle actually begins, and there is a fight, these kids versus the Americans, and this sort of takes over the second half of the film, and it is really it's the opposite of the glorification of death. The death is gory and brutal, and the violence is not highly choreographed or glorious in any way. It's really it's dark, and it's depressing, and it's brutal.
It's a really powerful anti-war movie as well as an anti-fascist film, because I think this movie really takes, and I think this was what's so great about this filmmaker, who on the strength of this movie was hired to direct the German scenes of The Longest Day.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
okay.
He got the job because they were so impressed with this movie and felt that this is a person who obviously could handle the German side of that. And is this filmmaker's opportunity to say how pointless fascism was, and that life is more precious than just having it wasted, because in this story, and of course, people, you might be excited to watch this if you haven't seen it, and you really should, even though we will reveal what happens. But one by one, these 7 kids that we have been following, all but one of them are going to be dead by the end of the movie.
Yeah. And that one who lives is the guy who wrote the book it is based on. This was based on his real life experience as a teenager, and he fought in this battle and did live through it to write this book. And so it is, I don't know how true it actually is or how much it was dramatized, but the event itself did happen in one way or another.
Yeah, there's a little statement that happens at the end of the movie that says, this was not found in any history books, that it was deemed so inconsequential. And I think that's powerful just even in that statement, because it's saying that, like, think about it, the consequences. In this town, these 6 boys were killed for nothing.
For no reason at all. And there's, I don't know, there's so much remarkable stuff that goes on, but one of the things that really struck me was the American soldiers realizing that these are kids and telling them to stop fighting and go and run away, right? Like, basically go home.
Yeah, they didn't want to have to kill these kids.
Yes, they realize they're children and they don't want to have to kill them, and they hesitate. And several of the American soldiers die because they hesitate to kill children.
Well, let's see. There's one kid is killed. The first kid that's killed is an airplane comes and does a strafe bomb.
Yes,
and he gets killed. There's another kid that was where there's these retreating German soldiers coming over the bridge, and they're like, after a bunch of stuff has happened, they're like scolding these kids, like, you're causing problems that shouldn't be there, and you got to stop. And there's an altercation, and then one of the kids ends up having to kill one of the German soldiers, right?
Yes, that's when the guys come to blow up the bridge, right?
Yeah. Yeah, these kids don't want the bridge blown up because they don't understand.
Because they've been sent to guard it, and they think the bridge is of great strategic value to their cause, and in fact, it's not. It's going to be blown up the entire time, and so yes, they end up. There's a lot of friendly fire in this movie.
But like, I mean, one kid it's kind of tough. He's up. They had a little makeshift sort of fort up in a tree that was by the bridge where they were always probably playing sort of make believe like sniper. And one of the kids is actually up there in a sniper's nest, and he has to go back and forth with shooting at a soldier who's taken over a position at a building. And it's interesting. I kept thinking, although this movie made me think about a lot of things, but in that glorious kind of death, I did have to ask myself, in terms of fascism, some of these kids achieved their personal goal. This kid actually takes out an American soldier. And so when he's killed, like his death, according to the Nazis and fascism, would be a glorious death.
The filmmaking maybe is a little choppy here. I actually think that's a good thing. I think if it was too clean, if it was cut together perfectly, I think it would start to glorify it a little bit and would start to glorify these kids and their fight. And instead, it just looks like chaos. It's choppy. It doesn't connect in the way it should necessarily. And film, it's like that Truffaut thing where it's impossible to make an anti-war film because film glorifies its subject. And I think this film really avoids glorifying as much as it can. There's a scene where in the battle where they shoot an American, he gets shot in the stomach, and like his guts are coming out. And he's trying to hold them in, and he's screaming and crying. And this one kid is like saying to his friend, "Shoot him, kill him." And of course, the friend is already dead and can't shoot him and kill him. But we see this just gory, suffering, painful, horrible death of this guy, and there's no glory in that, and there's definitely no glory in having shot him. And so I think that the filmmaking actually lends itself to sort of this anti-fascist aesthetic where it refuses to glorify the violence.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because think about this, 1959. What an audience who had been used to like probably seeing all of these like American World War II films where someone's shot and you don't see anything, right? And they just drop to the ground, and you always have the heroic death. And in this, I mean, it is a painful and gory scene, especially again for 1959.
Yeah.
And you think about the way other films might be. You take a group of friends, you get to know them, you have them go through basic training, and then you go through the film, and then you lose some of them, and it's like, these heroic moments and deaths. Here, you're just starting to get to know these kids.
Yeah.
They're thrown into it so fast. Things go wrong so fast that it's tragic when these kids die, because you really see them that they're talking 1 minute and now they're gone. And out of all these friends who grew up and had various dreams, and some of them have girlfriends that they like. There's the kid with the watch where he gives his girlfriend the watch, and then he like wants his watch back.
He takes it back.
Because he needs it for the cause, because he has to be able to see in the dark. And I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, it was interesting because he had one of those watches that had like radioactive material in it.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have been good for him. But like, these kids are just wiped off the map. And it's so senseless that this had to happen because there's so many ways that people tried. Like they didn't have to be there at the bridge. There were opportunities for them to go back home, and they would have all been safe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they probably would have. They probably would have lived because the Americans came in and rounded up all the Nazis, and these kids probably would have been fine.
Yeah, they were liberated. The town would have been liberated, and that's it.
Yeah.
And filmmakers like Wim Wenders.
Yeah.
He talks about this movie like as a teenager, seeing this film, it startled him and his friends. They were like, had seen nothing like it.
Yeah.
They were waiting for somebody in Germany to take an honest look at what happened. And there weren't any movies. This was, I think, really one of it's not the only one, but at the time, it was one of the very few films that started to take a look. And if you think about it, this movie came out only 14 years after the events. That's a short period of time.
Yeah, that's like if something happened in 2012 and we're making a movie about it.
I know. I thought about that. So this is, again, when I look at a movie that's really rich and is powerful, it makes me think of those types of things while I'm watching it or afterwards, and it really puts a lot of things in perspective for me. And I really do think that there's not one movie that covers every aspect of fascism, but I think this movie stands as one of the really great examples of watching fascism at work, and at the very end stage,
Yeah.
where it falls and how it harms people.
Well, and it ends up sort of consuming itself and turning on itself almost, where it just kind of disintegrates, and sort of and the final thing, of course, is destroying and killing their own children. Right? It's fascism is a totality. It doesn't stop at. It doesn't have a point at which it says, "Oh no, we'll protect our own children." No, even they get thrown into the meat grinder.
And I think that's like a great thing you just said about it, is that this film actually shows you that when fascism is an operation, how it does eat itself, where, by following those ideals, these people are dead.
Well, and that's there really is no other conclusion to fascism, right? It's going to consume itself and die and burn out, because that kind of radicalization can't sustain itself long term, and so it ends up destroying itself. It's like a cancer that kills it kills itself.
Yeah, it just also kills a lot of other people along the way.
Well, absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. And it does take, it does take the Russian and the American army sort of crushing it all at the end, but it is there sort of chewing away at itself in its final death throes.
It's unfair to compare one film to another, but, when we've talked about a film like Jojo Rabbit, and then I look at a film like this, and it's dealing with sort of the end days of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And it deals with youth. If I'm going to give one film out to like a group of students to watch, it's going to be this movie and not Jojo Rabbit.
And part of the big reason for me is that this movie doesn't have redemption, and Jojo Rabbit does. I think that fascism is a tragedy, not something that is necessarily you're cured of and move on as a country. And I think that's what this film is about, is that these scars have stayed with the German people, that this trauma, this tragedy still lingers.
Yeah, that's a very well said, because this film is a tragedy, and I think it makes it better for it. But also you think about these 6 boys, right?
Yeah.
Their family members. Now, a couple of days from this point, the war was going to be over, and these people are going to have to, come to a reckoning of what happened, but they're also not going to have their kids. And these people have also lost a lot of their husbands in the war. And
well, that's the thing. There's no men in the town except for some really old guys and the kids.
When we get back to some of the causes of war and such, and these people have paid a high price to get rid of the immigrants in their country, which were the Jews that they call them. And these were not immigrants. These were people who lived there in a country like ours, where people were willing to, vote to, I guess, get rid of immigration and make things less woke or something. They're paying a high price. I think they're paying a high financial price, but they're also paying a moral price.
Yes.
They're being faced with the fact that people have suffered because of their vote. People are dead, quite honestly, because of their vote.
And it's not just complicity. There's a willingness, and they do believe in the mythology that's been created by the populist fascist movement. And, it's like these kids aren't necessarily just duped into this. They're not villains. They're a product of this structure and this system and the situation that they're in, and they live out that destiny.
Well, that's what I like about this movie too. Is you're right. They're not villains. This is just, again, when Hitler came to power, these kids were 3 years old.
Yeah.
And so all they know is fascism. They've been taught nothing else. And they've also been taught that they're on the right side of history. And
exactly.
Yeah, with brainwashing, I mean, it's the only washing that they've had. And so they think they're in the right and that their cause is just. And not a single one of them is not looking forward to the draft. I was even looking for the one character. See, what would make this film false is if the character who lives who you said went to write the book,
Yeah.
was somehow a character that was a pacifist and didn't want to be part of it. That seems like would be the Hollywood approach to this movie.
That is the Jojo Rabbit approach, which is there's the kid whose heart is not in it, who's good inside, and it's just a matter of bringing out that good person through empathy and kindness. And this film doesn't give anybody an out.
Yeah, this kid doesn't live because he was extra brave or because he ran away. He was just happened to be lucky. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
1 of 7. That's a sobering statistic. He was 1 of 7 kids that had to live. It wasn't that 6 lived and 1 died. No, it was 1 lived and 6 died.
Yeah, and it's just by circumstance that he lives. The Americans turn around and retreat, and there's sort of a pause in the action, and he just wanders off, basically.
I, of course, had seen the movie a couple of years ago and then rewatched it. But this was a first for you, and I really didn't get, I don't know how much you looked at what this film was about beforehand, but I didn't really tell you much other than I kept on insisting that you see it. So I'm kind of curious as to like your experience of watching this movie for the first time and letting it unfold and probably not knowing that all 6 kids out of the 7 died.
Yeah, I didn't know they were all going to die, but I kind of suspected because it has that momentum to it, which is the sort of last night before people are executed kind of movie, right? And like Breaker Morant or something, right? It has that sort of inevitable pull towards violence and away from the normalcy. And I did know that they were assigned to guard a bridge, and so I knew that violence was coming, but I didn't know what it was going to look like, how it would be portrayed, whether it would be glorifying it in some way or whether it would be this sort of stark, brutal thing, which we ended up getting. And so when we get to the battle, I was pretty blown away by it. And part of it is just how chaotic it is, that it really doesn't follow. It's not like the good guys and the bad guys. It's not like the Americans are the good guys coming in. It's just fighting. It's not portrayed in a way that elevates it beyond just base violence.
Yeah, I mean, for the first hour of the movie, it's fascinating, it's interesting, but it's not an action movie. And then the last like half hour to 25 minutes of it is all action.
And it's brutal. It's unpleasant to watch. It's some war movies, you can sort of get into the action and root for the heroes. And here, you're not rooting for them, not just because they're Nazis, but you're not rooting for them because it's so brutal and so disturbing what's going on, and because their kids is part of it. And so we do fear for them, but I'm not necessarily rooting for them, and I'm not rooting for the Americans either. I just think the whole thing is horrible and just a tragedy.
We get plenty of end of day movies with the Hitler bunker movies, but that's usually what we get. We don't get what's happening on the outside, where the walls are closing in, and that citizens in the town who are like, there's another aspect that a lot of Nazis, whether or not because they didn't understand what would happen to them afterwards, they shot themselves. They committed suicide in mass as the Americans and Russians were closing in.
Absolutely. Well, they see the finality of it and the death of the whole ideology, ultimately.
Yeah. So again, this is a fascinating aspect of fascism on film, the end days, and there aren't a ton of films. I don't know, maybe because it is too depressing.
This is a pretty depressing film, right? I mean, it just shows how terrible fascism is. And
there's no David Bowie song and people dancing at the end of this one.
There's no redemption here. There's no redemption. And also, the kids are motivated by idealism, ultimately. And that is really disturbing to think about. They're not hateful, sneering, villainous Nazis. They're kids who think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, this is right. You said there is no redemption in this movie, but there is a lesson.
Exactly. Yes. There's definitely a lesson. It definitely it teaches us a lot about fascism in some really interesting ways that I think you're right, is not necessarily addressed by a lot of other films.
Yeah, so I think this is a very important movie in general. I think I really do feel like, if I use the word masterpiece, I definitely feel it's in that category. And I feel that out of all the movies we've done so far, if I had to cull together a top 10 or 5 movies that you should see, this has got to be in that list.
Well, and a lot of the films we've talked about are about sort of complicity or, like in Mephisto, it's somebody becoming a Nazi. And this is a film about people who've been Nazis their entire life. And it's a very different thing than sort of the beginnings of fascism or how fascism sets in. This is really about that stage 5 radicalization and what it's like to be inside that.
Very well said. So coming up on our program, I don't know exactly what movie we'll be doing next, but I can tell you that in the coming episodes, look for some films that get into resistance to fascism. Some from kind of this perspective of what was going on in France and also what was going on in Germany. And, look for the struggle of resistance, how hard it can be to resist when the forces are against you, and also when the authoritarian regime controls the wheels of justice.
Yeah. And it's the totality of fascism. It's all encompassing. There aren't counterpoints existing in that world.
So that'll be in upcoming episodes. So we got a lot of interesting stuff coming up. Again, this is Fascism on Film, but you can find us on fascismonfilm.com and, of course, on Apple Podcasts and other podcast areas. So anybody that you know who's interested in the subject, please send them our way. Again, now we're building up an entire sort of library of films that we could talk about. And it just shows you that if you think there's only like 5 movies on the subject, you're wrong. Again, I think, I'm not kidding when we said we've seen somewhere between 100 and 200 of these movies, and it's probably getting closer to 200. There's a lot of films available to talk about.
Yeah, and so we are being selective in what we choose. For me, I'm always looking for the thing that teaches me something about fascism, that illuminates something that I haven't seen before or educates us in some way. And this film, as you said, has a lesson.
All right. Well, please, if you haven't seen this movie, The Bridge, find it. I know it is on the Criterion channel. So if you have that, you can definitely see it there. All right. Well, this is it. I'm James Kent, and with me is Teal Minton.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.